As I watched Victor pack his weekend bag, something didn't sit right. He was humming to himself. Humming. Tossing clothes into his duffel like a teenager off to summer camp. "Just a guy's weekend at the lake house," he said. But that house wasn't just any house. It was mine. He never mentioned this trip before, and suddenly he was more excited than he'd been in months. I asked who was going, trying to sound casual. He rattled off a few names I recognized, but none of them sounded real in that moment. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and wished him fun. But inside, something was beginning to stir. Something I hadn't felt in a long time: doubt. Later that evening, I curled up on the couch with my tea, scrolling through social media without much thought, until I saw it. A photo, tagged and bright, popped up on my feed. Victor, at the summer house. But he wasn't alone. There was a woman in the background. Bare shoulders, a wine glass, and a smile I'd never seen before. I stared at the photo for a long time, my thumb frozen mid-scroll. My first thought wasn't even rage, it was disbelief. That summer house held so many memories, all tied to my family. My grandmother's laugh echoing off the porch, my mother sewing those floral curtains in the guest room. And now, it was being used like a cheap hotel in someone else's romance. The wine bottle on the table caught my eye next. A vintage Merlot I'd been saving for our anniversary, still unopened when I last checked. Now, it was half empty, sitting between Victor and that woman like a trophy. I zoomed in on the label, just to be sure. My chest tightened. He hadn't just lied. He'd taken something sacred and turned it into background decor for his little escape. And still, I didn't cry. Not yet. What I felt was something colder. Sharper. Like glass cracking beneath your feet. Slow and inevitable. I clicked on the woman's profile. Her name was Livia. Of course it was. Pretty, polished, all curated smiles and filtered sunrises. And now, she was in my house, sitting on my deck, sipping my wine, with my husband. I closed the app and set my phone down like it might burn me. My mind was already racing, but not with questions. No, I wasn't wondering why he did it. I knew that story by heart. What hit me was where he chose to do it. Out of all the places, he went there. To the only home that ever felt like mine. To the one place I thought was safe from this kind of betrayal. I started replaying conversations. Subtle comments Victor had made about needing space, about how the house just sat there. At the time, I brushed it off. After all, marriage has its quiet seasons. But now I realized he wasn't looking for peace. He was looking for privacy, and he thought I'd never notice. Or worse, that I wouldn't care enough to look. But I saw enough. Enough to understand the difference between a mistake and a choice. He didn't just betray me. He violated something personal, a legacy. And in that moment, I made a quiet promise to myself. He might have forgotten what that house meant. But I hadn't. And I wasn't about to let him rewrite its story. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I laid there with the glow of my phone lighting up the room, digging deeper. Every click felt like peeling off a layer of skin. I started with Livia's profile, then moved to Victor's likes, his comments, the trail he didn't bother covering. It wasn't just a fling. This had been going on for months. Right under my nose, there were photos, not many, but enough. A wine glass here, a familiar blanket there. I recognized the guest room throw pillow she used in a selfie. My grandmother had crocheted that pillow. I felt sick. He didn't just bring her into the house, he let her nest. She walked my floors, slept in my bed, posted about peaceful escapes like she hadn't hijacked my memories. Then I saw the worst of it, a caption on one of her posts. "Sometimes the best places are borrowed." Borrowed. Like my family's home was a weekend rental, like she was doing me a favor by using it. The comments were filled with heart emojis and "so jealous" replies. I stared at the screen and realized they didn't just cross a line, they danced on it. I kept scrolling, numb but focused. It wasn't just the pictures, it was the details, the little things they probably thought no one would notice. The wine Victor poured for her? That was from the crate my father gave us when we got married. He wrote our initials on the label with a gold marker. I saw it sitting on the patio table, half drunk, like a souvenir in someone else's love story. Then there were the sheets. The camera angle caught just enough. Ivory cotton with lavender embroidery. My mother's hands had sewn every stitch. They were meant to be passed down, not passed around. Livia was lounging on them in a robe I didn't recognize, but the bed was mine. And now, every thread felt soiled. It wasn't heartbreak I felt. It was erasure. Somehow, the smallest things cut the deepest. A chipped mug on the kitchen counter, one I'd painted with my niece last summer. The garden she posted about with pride, captioned like she'd planted those hydrangeas herself. Every object she touched had a story, and none of them belonged to her. It was like watching someone wear your clothes, your skin, and pretend they were home. I paused and stared at the screen, the glow reflecting off eyes I hadn't even realized were tearing up. But still, no sobs, no dramatic collapse. Just this sharp, unrelenting awareness. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about invasion. They didn't just take each other. They took something from me. Something intimate. Sacred. And they didn't even blink while doing it. I thought about calling him, about screaming, about driving there in the dead of night and dragging them both out by the collar. But rage wasn't what filled me. Not yet. What I felt was focus. Like everything that mattered had suddenly snapped into place. My name was still on that deed. The house, my house, was still mine. And now I had something they didn't. Clarity. So I started collecting screenshots, messages, dates, evidence. I wasn't going to confront him with emotion. I was going to confront him with facts, with presence, with power. If Victor thought he could repurpose my memories into his playground, he was about to learn the hard way. I don't burn bridges. I renovate them and change the locks. I waited until Monday. No calls, no texts, just silence while he played house in mine. Then I packed a small overnight bag, not out of impulse, but intention. I folded my clothes neatly, printed the property deed, and slipped the spare key into my purse. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't panicking. I was preparing, like someone returning to claim what was rightfully theirs. The drive felt almost ceremonial. The further I got from the city, the clearer everything became. Each mile peeled back another layer of grief and gave way to something steadier, dignity. I remembered helping my grandmother paint those shutters, laughing as she scolded me for missing spots. That house wasn't a backdrop to someone else's affair. It was my history, and I was done letting it be disrespected. I pulled up to the gravel driveway just after 9. The same hydrangeas were blooming, the same swing creaked in the breeze, but everything felt different. Not because the house had changed, because I had. My heart wasn't racing. My hands didn't shake. I unlocked the door like someone who belonged there, because I did. And whatever scene waited inside, I was ready. I stepped inside, and it hit me all at once. The smell of coffee, the faint hum of jazz from the speakers, the clinking of silverware on ceramic. They were having breakfast, like they owned the morning, like they belonged. I followed the sounds to the patio, each step measured, each breath deliberate. I wasn't sneaking in. I was arriving. There's a difference. Victor sat at the table, halfway through a bite of toast. He looked up mid-chew and froze. The fork dropped from his hand, clattering against the plate. Livia turned slowly, confusion creasing her perfect forehead. She was wearing one of his shirts, my old shirt if I wasn't mistaken. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the birds outside and the tension tightening like piano wire. I didn't give them time to talk first. That wasn't the tone of this visit. I stepped fully into the light, straightened my spine, and met Victor's eyes without blinking. He looked like a man caught robbing his own house, except it wasn't his. It never was. And in that second, I could see it all over his face. He'd finally remembered whose name was actually on the deed. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I simply placed my bag on the entry table and walked past them, like a woman coming home after a long trip. Because that's exactly what this was, me returning to what was mine. Victor opened his mouth, probably to spin some weak explanation, but I raised one hand gently. That silent gesture said more than words ever could. Don't. I walked through each room with purpose. The living room, the hallway, the kitchen. I made sure they saw me taking it all in, the house, the air, the memories. I paused by the hutch that held my grandmother's china. One teacup was missing. I didn't ask who broke it. I already knew, but I wasn't here to argue over pieces. I was here to reclaim the whole. When I finally turned back to them, I didn't ask why. I didn't need reasons or apologies. The facts were standing right there in front of me, disheveled, awkward, and suddenly very aware that the weekend was over. And me? I was calm, graceful even, because there's power in not flinching, in not reacting, in simply reminding someone, without a single scream, exactly who you are. I walked out onto the patio, slowly, deliberately, like I had all the time in the world, because I did. They didn't. Victor was still frozen in his seat, his mouth twitching like he couldn't decide whether to speak or vanish. Livia glanced at him, waiting for some cue. I gave them one instead. "You're trespassing," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Both of you." Victor stammered, the way a man does when he realizes charm won't save him this time. "Bianca, let me explain." I shook my head. Not because I didn't want to hear it, but because I didn't need to. I pulled the folded copy of the deed from my purse and placed it gently on the table, right next to his empty coffee mug. Then came the envelope, divorce papers, signed and dated. Livia blinked. "Wait, this is your house?" I turned to her, not cruel, just clear. Inherited from my grandmother. Every tile, every doorknob, every damn daisy in that garden. She looked down, embarrassed. Victor looked defeated. And me? I felt steady, rooted, as if for the first time in a long time I was standing on solid ground, my ground. I gave them a choice, plain and simple. "Take your guest and leave," I said, voice still even, eyes steady. "Or I call the police to remove you from my property." No yelling, no threats, just the truth, handed to them like a mirror. Victor's face flushed a deep red. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. But no excuses came out this time. He knew better. Livia stood slowly, brushing non-existent crumbs from her lap, suddenly less confident without the illusion of secrecy. She didn't say a word, just gathered her things with quick, quiet hands. Victor still sat there, like he didn't know where to go next. "You should leave with her," I added, softly but without invitation. I'd hate to have to explain this scene to the officer on duty. The moment felt suspended, him staring at me like he might still have a chance to explain, to justify. But there was nothing left to salvage. The house wasn't his to apologize for. The marriage wasn't his to mend. This wasn't a conversation, it was an ending. And endings, when done right, don't need noise. They just need clarity, and a front door that swings shut behind you. Victor finally stood, slowly like gravity had gotten heavier. He looked around one last time, the patio, the garden, the worn cushion on the bench where we used to drink coffee together. Maybe he thought sentiment would save him, maybe he hoped I'd crack, but I didn't. I gave him nothing. No tears, no flashbacks, just presence. He had gambled everything, and lost. He muttered something under his breath as he turned to leave. I didn't ask him to repeat it. Whatever it wasn't for me. Livia was already halfway down the path, avoiding eye contact like a guest caught overstaying her welcome. And that's all she ever was. A guest. One who never learned the rules of someone else's home. I watched them walk away without a word. Then, for the first time in days, I exhaled. Not a sigh of sadness, a release. A slow, steady letting go. I wasn't just taking back my house. I was taking back my story, one decision at a time. And though the door behind them was now closed, the one ahead of me, the one into something stronger, cleaner, mine, had just begun to open. The house was quiet again. Not empty. Still. Peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months. I spent the next few weeks cleaning, rearranging, reclaiming. I painted over old memories and planted new ones. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration, about turning the place they defiled into something sacred again. Not just for me, for women like me. That's when the idea came. A boutique retreat, right there in my grandmother's home. A space for women healing from betrayal, heartbreak, loss. Somewhere safe. Somewhere true. I envisioned reading nooks in sunlit corners, soft linens that smelled like lavender, a garden full of stories waiting to bloom. It wasn't just a house now, it was a second chance. The contractors came and went, hauling away the past one dusty plank at a time. I kept only what mattered. A photo of Grandma on the mantel, a chipped mug that made me smile. The rest? Out. Gone. This wasn't about hanging on, it was about making room. And just as the final coat of paint dried, a message buzzed in on my phone. From him. It was short. Just 5 words. Can we please talk, Bianca? I stared at the screen, the glow of it casting a soft blue across the kitchen. He hadn't called. He hadn't knocked. Just a message. Like none of it mattered enough for more. Like he could stroll back into my life with a string of pixels and a guilty conscience. I didn't feel anger, just distance. I put the phone down and poured myself a cup of coffee, the same mug he once chipped. Funny, how something broken could still hold warmth. I sipped slowly, watching the breeze tug at the white curtains I'd just hung. I thought about the women who would soon walk through that front door. Women who had been silenced, shamed, sidelined. They wouldn't find pity here. They'd find peace. The phone buzzed again. Another message. I miss you. This time I smiled. Not because I missed him too, I didn't, but because he still didn't get it. He never did. This wasn't about what he missed. This was about what I remembered, who I was before I shrank to fit his comfort, and who I'd become now that I'd stopped apologizing for outgrowing him. I picked up the phone, typed 2 words, and hit send. Private property. No explanation, no opening, just a boundary. Firm, final, mine. He may have thought he was being clever, sentimental even, trying to slip through the back door with regret. But there were no more doors open to him here. What he left behind wasn't an invitation, it was a locked gate. Weeks later, the house opened for its first guests. I greeted each woman with fresh towels, warm tea, and something Victor never gave me: respect. We shared stories under starlight, laughed in the kitchen, cried in the garden. And every time someone said, "This place feels like home," I knew I'd done it. I had taken pain and turned it into purpose. Heartbreak into healing. He turned my sanctuary into a scandal. I turned it into a legacy. That's the part they never see coming. The aftermath, the rebuilding. The quiet power of a woman who doesn't just survive betrayal, but builds a life so beautiful it makes the betrayal irrelevant. This wasn't his house. It never was. And now, it's something better than revenge. It's mine.